understand the mystery. First take a look at the history. The words we use will give us clues. So join us now in Church Chatter.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Church Chatter podcast, where we unpack a different church word or phrase each week. I'm Sam. I have my doctorate in language and culture, and I study religious linguistics.
And I'm Dillon. I have a Master of Divinity, and I'm an ELCA Lutheran pastor.
So today we're going to talk about the word business, and this is the Church Chatter podcast. So specifically, is church a business? So Dillon, is church a business?
Absolutely not.
Okay. That was a good episode. We will talk to you all next week.
Oh, if only that was that easy.
I'm just kidding. So today we are going to unpack this. People have done extensive research and writing and talking about this. Is church a business? If you're a church-going person, I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you are a church person, or you have been a church person, or you are interested in what it means to be a church kind of person. So you've probably heard people say, like, well, church is just a business. It's a business. We are here to say that it is not. We will talk about it partially. We can't possibly talk about every angle because, again, people talk about this extensively. But church is not a business. So we are going to talk about, because I study linguistics, we're going to talk about this word business, and we're going to talk about capitalism because I study what's called sociolinguistics, which is about sociology and the language of culture and social life, and capitalism is part of that. We're going to talk about just a few things the Bible says about money, because believe it or not, the Bible talks a lot about money. Actually, Jesus talks a lot about money and resources. We're going to talk about money ethics, and then we're ultimately going to make the point that church is not a business, and if it's not a business, then what is it? So this is our second time starting this podcast because it's after bedtime, and our two children decided 5 minutes after they went to bed that they had to knock on their door, and we had to go recover them up. And as you know, that was not a 30-second endeavor. It took 10 minutes. So I'm thinking about right now family. And when someone says church is a business, because churches do have to raise money, they do have to make money. When people say church is a business, that gives me the same ick as if somebody said family is a business. Do you know what I mean? Because family, as far as I'm concerned, Dillon and I are both employed people. Our jobs are just fundraising for our family. Mm-hmm. That's what a job is. We're raising funds so that we can have our family.
Right.
So, but we don't say our family is a business. Do you know what I mean? And
Right.
I feel like that's a good place to start. Like, church is not a business. Just because money has to be coming in doesn't mean it's a business. So do you have anything to say before I talk about the word business? Just kind of like an intro, or you're good?
No, just that, because I know what generally you're going to cover, just that it is very easy, especially in the United States or in any kind of Western country, to conflate the church or a religious organization of any kind, whether that's Christian or Buddhist or Jewish or whatever, to be a type of business. They're actually very, very different things, deeply different.
But in our culture, we even view our own individual identities as businesses and profit makers. Like in the world of social media, right? Even people are seen as corporations now. So the line is really blurred.
Right, and
so you couldn't be blamed if you think church is a business, is what I'm saying. I get it.
And for people like Samantha and I, and many of our listeners, if you follow or live by or enjoy the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, who is the central figure of Christianity, you will find out very, very quickly that
he's got opinions about money.
His opinions about money, but also his opinions of his own near and dear relationship with his own religious text and religion of Judaism, reforming it, because during his time, during Second Temple Judaism, which we now call it, they were operating the Jewish temple in Jerusalem as a type of marketplace, as a type of business, to line the pockets of themselves and not give back to the poor and the needy.
Right.
So
everybody knows that Jesus flipped a table in the temple. That's because he was upset that people were buying and selling in the temple.
Right.
He was upset about commerce. He was upset about money.
So when someone says a church and a business are the same thing, then you are missing the teachings of Jesus.
Right. Okay. So the word business, it comes from the Old English word business, which later was spelled busyness, right? With a Y, like busy, B-U-S-Y, ness, N-E-S-S. And this originally, now this is actually really interesting to me if you're a language nerd like I am. So the Old English word business originally meant occupation, or literally the state of being occupied or busy, right? So think about like you're being occupied. It's the same as being busy. Something is occupying you. That's really interesting because we see the connection right away in the language between being occupied and an occupation. If somebody asks you, what is your occupation? They're asking you not just what occupies you, what occupies your time, but what is your job? So we're already seeing, now I, as Dillon knows, I'm obsessed about a lot of things. One thing is language about time. So this is really telling that...
She's not lying either. She loves...
Yes, I'm obsessed with language about time. So the idea that our time being occupied has to do with the word occupation, which has to do with the word business and our jobs. Our occupation is our job. We're just seeing how we spend our time being equated with our job over and over again. So to have an occupation or job is about being busy. Hence the word busyness, which later became business. And then in Middle English, which is like the 1200s to 1400s, it started to include work-related activities specifically. So we see occupation and busyness being about business and profit making. And by the 1500s, it shifted to be really about industrial activities. So if you know about the Industrial Revolution, it really started to take hold here. And it started out as this sort of state of emotional or mental busyness to labor that pays, to business. Does that make sense the way I explained it? So it became all about profit. Now, businesses are structured to make and expand profit. It's about growth. And that leads us into capitalism. So we live in what many people are calling late stage capitalism because there is a huge belief. I am of this belief. If you study sociology, in the world of sociology, there is a belief taking hold. I don't even want to call it a belief because it is grounded. It's not just like this arbitrary belief, but it's really grounded in a lot of research and historical data. But late stage capitalism is called late stage capitalism because it's about to crumble in on itself. It's not going to last. Capitalism as we know it, it's not working. There are people who are way too rich and people who are way too poor. It's just not working. And these models collapse in on themselves. We have that data. So in the world of sociology, it's called late stage capitalism. That's another episode, maybe. I don't know. But I don't even know what's relevant for this podcast entirely. But our culture has been so heavily shaped by capitalism. And capitalism knows one thing. More. Grow, bigger, taller, fatter, higher, newer, better, more. That's what capitalism is. It's very greedy. It's very gluttonous. Gluttony, by the way, is one of the 7 deadly sins.
Is it really?
And that's not just about food, right? People think like, oh, so gluttonous because they eat a lot. It's also about hoarding money. So when we operate under the ethic of exponential growth, like more, higher, taller, fatter, bigger, all these things, more, better. That is an ethic of capitalism. That is not an ethic of church.
And it is a shame because many modern day churches, especially in Western countries, which would include the United States, fall into that capitalistic mentality of running a church organization or a religious organization. We need more and more members. We need more and more revenue, which comes through donations and tithing and offerings and all these things. We need a bigger building. We need this, but in all of that, they are neglecting the very things to which Jesus calls us to do. It is really interesting. If I could just offer this so much. So you're talking about business, and a business exists to provide goods and services, like back and forth. And so if you think of like a company, a company exists because they make really, really great athletic gear. And that's what they're geared towards, and they make that athletic gear. And they're not giving that athletic gear away for free. Someone's not donating it and giving it away for free. They're making this great product, and then they want you to pay a generous price because it costs a lot to make, right? And so a business exists for goods and services to make a profit. And they bring consumerism, they bring commercialism, they bring marketing, and they're basically making money for either the owners of the company or the owner of the company or the shareholders that they have. A church or a religious organization is something totally, totally different.
We do not have shareholders.
We don't have shareholders. We don't have a type of like per se owner. We don't have a good and we're selling it for profit. There's none of that. There's none of that going on.
And people, ideally in a church, and we all know of churches where this is not true, and it should be smothered right away. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but in a business, if somebody is a shareholder and they have given money to be part owner or whatever, they get to have a say. In a church, people with a lot of money, they don't get more of a say than other people about all issues. You know what I mean? Like,
right, because the church's primary goal of existence is to offer people a spiritual journey, to wrestle with,
keep a story alive,
to wrestle with what it means to be a human, why we are here, what is our meaning and purpose,
to care for each other,
teachings of morals and ethics for both ourselves and the community. If you're in a Christian community, it is the space and place to which a pastor will do different types of rites of passage, such as First Communion and confirmation and baptism and weddings and marriages and funerals and vow renewals and blessing people's houses and all these types of things. It's a community that gathers weekly to worship. It's a community where people donate things, and then those things that are donated, for the most part, go right back out the door to care for someone else, because we have not something that we have to be how do I want to say this? Connected to our shareholders. You have to sell this product so that we can make more money and our shareholders are going to be happy and the owner is going to be happy. No, it's about shared. The church is about shared resources, a spiritual journey, worship, prayer, meditation, programming that is all wrestled together.
Yeah, well,
it's not about. There's no profit to be made, except maybe you could say the profit, which is a non-monetary profit. The profit to be made is that people are waking up to who God is, who they are, and how to get in deeper community to make the world a better place. I don't see that as profit.
Well, that's not a monetary profit.
But someone
right?
someone could see as we're offering,
Yeah. Yes. Well, so this entire episode is going to be a paradox, which means two things that are seemingly contradicting, but they exist at once. So we have to start with more and growth cannot be the foundation of a church, and having more money matters. Both of those things are true. So all those things that we just talked about with churches, money can't, I'm going to say this multiple times this episode, money can't be the center of all things, but money is integrated into all things. So
right, and
having it matters, making more of it matters, because you can't do anything if you don't have money. So we got to talk about money, right?
Right, but real quick, it's extremely important to, when you talk about the difference between a church or a religious organization and a for-profit business or a corporation, you have to look at what is the purpose, what is the root and the purpose of why a business exists and why a religious organization exists. And every single time that you look at the purpose of a business versus the purpose of a religious organization or a church, every single time you're going to get they are totally, totally different.
Right.
The purpose is different.
And purpose and posture. We'll even towards the end of this episode talk about nonprofits and how a church is a nonprofit.
I'm going to talk about that.
Yes. A church is a nonprofit, but even a church is different from a typical nonprofit as well. Okay. So, money cannot lead us, but it is integrated into every part of our life. I'm going to say it over and over again. It matters. Actually, money is really primal. I think all of us have experienced at one point or another deep anxiety about money. And you're up at night and you're wondering like, oh, I'm just so stressed out because, I don't know how I'm going to pay my electric bill or whatever it is. Or, oh, Christmas presents really snuck up on me and that's going to be a couple $100. Whatever it is, right? We've all been stressed about money, whether it's at work or in our personal or family lives or whatever. And sometimes, if you're like me at least, sometimes you think like, oh, like it's just money, who cares? No. Money, if you think about people a long time ago, if they haven't eaten, if their little village or community or family hasn't eaten in 3 days and they can't find anything, I'm talking like hunter-gatherer societies, right?
Yeah.
They can't find a wild boar or a cow or something to slaughter to eat, they're going to be up at night really upset, kind of anxious, right? Because money is about survival, because money is how we get food now. It's how we pay for shelter. It's about survival. So when we have money problems, we have problems. Like money problems are real. Just because it feels abstract, because money is a system and you don't like hold money in your hands, you have money problems, you have real problems, right? So like, I don't want to have an episode about churches and a business because businesses are all about money and churches, we're free from money. No, we are not. Nobody is free from money in the current setup of things, right? In fact, nobody has ever been free from money because money is about resources, and how we arrange resources has always been integrated into what it means to be human. Do you know what I mean?
Well, right. And even before we had, paper and metal coinage, there has always
trading goods and services.
Trading goods and services and in the marketplace.
That's why I like the word resources, because now it's money, but it has always been about resources.
It has always been. If you might have chickens and I might have a great field to grow corn in. Well, we're going to trade. I'm going to give you corn. You're going to give me chickens. And somebody has tomatoes and somebody has great lettuce and
purple dye used to be really expensive. You have a nice blouse that's dyed purple, and I'm going to give you 3 chickens for that.
Certain spices for cooking and other types of scents are not in my area, and so there's always been a sharing of resources, and sometimes a hoarding of resources. Mm-hmm. And then you get monetary paper and metal coinage, and then all of a sudden you say, well, you know what, we only have a little bit of this purple fabric, so we know that we can sell it for a lot more. Mm-hmm. Because, and then so you get into, we play the game with each other, which is unfortunately the way of life, and it's also kind of sickening.
Yeah, so this episode, we're about to talk about money for a couple minutes, because I don't feel like you can talk about churches as a business, or rather not as a business, without really talking about money. And Dillon knows this, I have a very woo-woo posture towards money. Would you say that?
Yes.
I have a very spiritual relationship with money.
And I do not.
Dillon has an avoidant relationship with money. Do you wish I didn't say that?
Well, you said it now.
So here's what I know. I'm about to get woo-woo. So this isn't like a hard and fast, like here's financial advice. That's not what this is. We are not financial advisors. But this is about church life. And so let's just jump into it. Here's what I know to be true about this reality. Like, people can say they believe things, right? I know this. I know this at the deepest core of me. The parts of reality that we ignore or avoid will eventually haunt us. I know that because every part of my life that I try to push away and try to ignore and try to avoid, it hits me like a brick wall eventually. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
100% of the time. There has yet to be something that I ignore that doesn't come back to haunt me until I deal with it. You have to talk about it. If you ignore your spouse or your partner or your children or the growing grass in your backyard or the dishes or a friendship or whatever, if you avoid cleaning your house, it will eventually get so bad that it hits a brick wall and collapses in on itself, right? You cannot ignore your problems. Eventually, you will have no choice but to face it. Money problems are real problems. Face it. Talk about it. Stop being weird about it. Dillon knows I'm obsessed with, I use the word obsessed a lot, but something I care a lot about is saying the true thing. And I
don't think that's weird to say that you're obsessed with it.
When there's an elephant in the room, I have to say the thing. I have to say it. I like can't, it's like a compulsion. Dylan's eyebrows just went up. So, and everybody knows it. Money is an elephant in the room. In families, with couples, in organizations, people get weird with money. And I have my own issues with money, which we're going to talk about. Money is exposing. It's a mirror that we all hold up to ourselves. But I hate being a part of a group where it's like money is a topic because somebody either has a lot of it or not a lot of it. And nobody talks. It's the elephant in the room. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, I do know it's the elephant in the room because, I mean, as a pastor,
you have to talk about money all the time.
As a pastor, I have to talk about money all the time, and as a leader of a church, as the pastor, I talk about money a lot of time. That we have budgets, we have to follow all these things, and so we talk about money a lot. But also, I think one of my primary duties as a pastor is to marry people, to officiate weddings, and a part of that is doing premarital counseling, couples counseling. Sometimes, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, but always before the wedding. But then sometimes, people will be they'll be married for a couple of years, and sometimes things come up, and they will come to me for very general pastoral counseling, which is very different from psychological counseling. And so I offer pastoral counseling for couples. And one of the biggest things for married couples, or even couples that aren't married, but mostly they're married, is finances.
The best marriage advice that Dillon and I ever got, and we got it from a few separate people, was join your finances. Get married and join your finances
and
right
be
away.
transparent with your finances.
Don't have separate accounts. Now, however you arrange your money with your spouse, if you have a partner or whatever, fine, go for it. Like, there's a million ways. For us, I have a hard time imagining having separate finances because every decision that we have to make stems from money. If we had separate accounts, I mean, especially whenever you have kids in the mix, then you go out to eat. Who's paying? You buy new underwear for your child. Who's paying? You buy.
Well, and
it's very tricky. It's like at the center. Do you know?
Yeah,
what I mean?
and there's a lot of great statistics and data out there that show that some will say in the top 3, some will say in the top 5. I've never seen it below the top 5. So either the top 3 or the top 5 finances when it comes to money and dealing with money and spending money and saving money with married couples. I see this all the time as a pastor. Is number one, they're not having a conversation about money. That's number one. And number two, because they're not having the conversation of that money, is one of the top 3 or 5 that leads to separation and divorce.
Yeah.
Well,
money is, again, I'm getting woo-woo, but I really believe this. Money is a teacher. Money teaches you things, and everybody has a different idea of what marriage is. For us, this sounds like I'm on a high horse, and that's not at all how I mean it, because everybody has their own way. But for us, if those lessons that money teaches us aren't learned together, then we kind of grow in separate directions. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I think that's true of a church as well. Everybody needs to talk about money and have a shared ethic to some degree, or else it's going to grow in different directions and there's going to be conflict. So let's talk about the Bible and money and ethics, and then bring that back to what that means for a church community not operating as a business. So the Bible and money. Listen, the Bible and money is a huge topic, and we are only about to skim the surface. Yeah. So 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10 says that, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains." Ooh, there's a lot to be said about that. The main thing, which a lot of people have heard this before, but I think it's really important, that doesn't say money is evil. It says the love of money is evil. Wealth is not the problem. If you find yourself in a position where your church or you as an individual happens to have wealth or a lot of money or plenty resources, we will talk about that soon. But that is not the problem. It's wealth is not the problem. Attachment to wealth is the problem.
Right, and I say this to a lot of people, going back to the difference between a business and a church and their purpose. The purpose of a church is not to run a bank. Mm-hmm. It is not to have nice little fat accounts.
Oh, we're going to talk about that extensively soon.
And hold them, and have tight purse strings. There is something to being financially responsible or fiscally responsible. Mm-hmm. Even practicing sometimes from time to time fiscal restraint.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about discipline and trust.
That is, financial discipline is a gift, mm-hmm. and being a good steward of resources.
Yeah.
But churches are not banks.
Yeah.
They're not businesses.
Yeah. I'm going to talk a lot about that soon. Matthew, again, we're talking about the Bible and money. Matthew chapter 6, verse 24 says no one can serve two masters. And then later it says you cannot serve God and wealth. You can't do both, right? Proverbs 11:28. Those who trust in their riches will wither. So everything, I love the word wither. Here's, again, I'm getting woo-woo. Everything that we put in, Dillon knows that. He knows almost everything I'm saying here, but I believe this so much. I talk about it probably daily. You tell me, Dillon. Everything that we put out into the world turns inward. When we individually, communally, or nationally hoard money from those who need it, that energy will turn inward on us. It will collapse inward. That's why whenever you're doing your best and somebody is angry at you because of it, they are exposing themselves and what is inside of them, and they're just turning it outward. You know what I mean? Like people who are angry at everything, it's because that energy is collapsing in on themselves and they have no choice but to it's like a cup that's overflowing. And whatever is overflowing in that cup is going to get all over everything else. So when we trust in our riches, we will wither because that energy is collapsing inward.
I'd have to look to see what the Hebrew word, is that from Proverbs?
Yeah.
I'd have to look to see what that Hebrew word is that they translated for wither. But if you look at wither metaphorically, that's an interesting word to choose. Again, I would love to go back and see what the Hebrew word there was. But the English word that they choose for wither, that's interesting because you could really stretch that out. Withering is a slow process. Mm-hmm. It's not like, how does it read? Those who trust in their riches will be destroyed, kind of this immediate thing, but they'll wither away.
That's why I use the phrase collapse in on yourself. I guess that could be immediate, but the way I picture something collapsing in on itself is like it falls inward and it doesn't just crumble, but it like slowly falls inward.
Well, I think of a flower. I think of a flower
crumbles in on itself.
That withers, and that sometimes takes a little bit of time. But then when it's
Well, what is true outside becomes true inside. And this is going to be a common theme for a couple minutes. So hang in there. If you don't get it yet, I think you will. What is true inside of us also becomes true outside. Like, so I think of like a river dam, right? When it comes to money, don't build a dam. Like, what are you doing? Don't stop the movement of money. We're going to talk about that.
You think the Hoover Dam was no?
Here's one I really like. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not regretfully or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. I cannot overstate how much I love and use this all of the time. Don't I? All of the time.
You do, and I would like to speak about how that has been deeply misused.
Okay, go ahead.
That has hardly anyone pays attention to the full text of that 2 Corinthians.
Wait, can I just read it again? Because we're going to talk about this for a couple minutes. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not regretfully or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Tell us how it's been misused.
Beautiful. So many televangelism pastors, so pastors that preach at these huge, big, usually non-denominational mega churches, and they're on TV, will, in order to keep their machine running, and you can catch my sarcasm there.
And they run their church like a business.
And they run the church like a business. They use that 2 Corinthians passage all the time, but what they forget to do, and I think quite a hellish way, is they forget the whole first part of it, and they only speak about God loves a cheerful giver. And they focus on the last two words there, cheerful giver. And they say that you need to be cheerful. And when you're more cheerful, you'll give more. You'll give more. And they don't talk about out of the kindness and goodness of one's heart to give unto God and their neighbor. They talk about what a cheerful giver is there going to be more. You're really going to dig deep into your pockets and you're going to give a lot. And that is one of this 2 Corinthians passage, which is rather interesting, I learned this in seminary, is one of the greatest passages that is used to promote the prosperity gospel.
I was going to use that phrase, prosperity gospel, yes.
And that is not what Paul is talking about in 2 Corinthians. Mm-hmm. If you know anything about the church in Corinth and Paul's ministry in Corinth...
Remember, Paul was writing these letters to specific churches.
Communities.
In Corinth, Chloe's people.
Correct.
He was writing to a church who was being led by a woman named Chloe.
Right. And who
if we had a third daughter, which we won't, but her name would have been Chloe.
Who was also the church we know from historic writings, the church in Corinth, this second letter from Paul to the church in Corinth. They were talking about they were having issues with compulsory giving. That you must give this and you must give this much. And Paul is saying, no, it is not about compulsory giving. It is about the kindness and the goodness and the joyfulness that God gives us to give back to God and neighbor. It is not about giving more and more and more. And when you give more and more and more, you're going to get back more and more and more. That prosperity gospel. Right. That's not what Paul's talking
Your
about.
faith in Jesus or God or Christianity or whatever will not make you rich. There are plenty of poor people who have beautiful faiths.
Well, and it's
that's not how it works, and that's not at all what we're saying here.
And Jesus's love for you has nothing to do with how much money you give to the church, and your love for God has nothing to do with how much money or how little money you can give. I think about the widow's mite, the widow's coin, which is a beautiful story.
So in this specific passage from the Bible, I just want to talk about it. I'm going to riff on it for a minute. So if you are giving money or time to raise money or serve any group or family or whatever, if you are giving your resources, do it gladly. Again, this is the thing Dillon and I talk about all the time. I am so passionate about this. Do it gladly or don't do it at all. Right?
That's good.
Imagine if every time we bought our children new shoes or an ice cream cone or food for dinner, we were angry about it, right? Imagine if we were resentful because we had to give our resources to our children.
And sometimes we are.
but we don't show it. I don't know if we are.
I'm being silly.
Sometimes giving time as parents is difficult.
time.
But
I don't think I would
time
ever
is a
be.
resource, but
I don't think I would ever begrudge the girls. If we want to give, like, there's a local ice cream place in our town, and if the girls say, I want a hot dog, French fries, and a milkshake, I'm not going to say, oh, I really,
Right.
of course. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean,
yeah, sometimes having kids and spending money on them is difficult. That's not what I'm saying. But resenting them for it, I've never felt that. And I don't think you have either. I would assume a lot of parents don't feel resentment, like, oh, I got to spend money on you, right?
No.
So,
but I'm sure some do.
I'm sure, and that's my point, that does damage, right?
Well, not only to yourself, but deeply to your children.
That's what I'm saying. It does damage to your child who you are serving with your resources. Do it gladly or don't do it at all. If I feel like, so I'm going to ground this, but let's just talk about kids for a minute. If we went to the store and we bought our children a toy, but I complained about it the whole way home, being like, oh, I'm so upset I had to buy that for you. I had to work 4 hours to make that much money. It would have done less damage to just say, sorry, we cannot buy the toy. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's our right to sometimes not be able to buy something versus buying it for them and then being externally resentful, even internally resentful about it, because people pick up on that. Kids especially are attuned to those emotions. They can pick up on it. It does damage. So do it gladly or don't do it at all, because whenever you do it with resentment attached, that energy is there. So now make that bigger. So let's be specific, because this is about church. If you are part of a church committee or give to a church in any way, but you have resentment about what you are giving, stop. Just stop. Find a way to be joyful about it, or stop doing it altogether. That church that you are serving does not need your resentful giving. In fact, it will do harm over time. Just like if we were to give to our children, but be resentful about it, that does more harm than just not giving in the first place.
Well, because it's coming out of what Paul is specifically talking about in 2 Corinthians. It's talking out of this obligatory, compulsory, oh, I have to give because I want to get to heaven, or I have to give because what will people think of me, or I have to give because what is the pastor going to think about me? Paul is telling us...
Or I have to give because I want people to know that I am good and I give and I work hard.
And I shouldn't say that Paul is telling us. Paul is historically telling the people of Corinth, which can also in some ways be how could I say this? It can be for us, but not to us. And if you're,
it can be relevant for us.
If you're a grammar person, you'll know the difference there. But that is exactly what he's talking about. The idea about being this cheerful giver is not out of obligation, is not compulsory. It's out of the goodness of love of God and neighbor, and honestly love of self, which is the three tenets that Jesus talks about.
That's what I see the most.
And when you're seeing like love of self, like God's gifted you so much to give back to what God has given you, to give back to neighbor, and also to uplift yourself in a cheerful, joyful way. I think that sometimes people give, just like you said, and they're like, oh, well, woe is me. Yeah. Woe is me.
Well, we all know those people who give their time or money, but they complain about it. And a church who's trying to do God's work and live out Jesus's teachings, we don't need that energy. Bringing that kind of energy into a church will make a church toxic. That's true of any organization. Bring that kind of energy, and we all know it, right? We've all been around people in whatever organization we have served before. Even if it's like a family, like just think of any group where money has been part of the conversation. You need people to bring in money. Even in a partnership, if you're married to somebody or you're dating somebody and you're sharing bills somehow, or you live together, even if you're just dating somebody and you go out to eat and they're going to pay, but they're like angry that they have to pay, or I think even worse, they want you to know just how much they're paying. Like, wow, you really got an expensive meal and I bought that for you, right? You can feel how self-serving and egotistical it is, and how they're not giving from a cheerful place. They're giving from a place of feeding their ego, or, any number of reasons. We all know what we're talking about here. When I hear about a person quietly and steadily and respectfully leaving a group because they simply lost joy about it somewhere along the way, I love that. I love that. That sounds like a person of integrity to me. That is a person listening to spirit. If we belong in a space, whether it's a fundraising group or a council or a board of directors or whatever it is, if we belong in that space, I'm not saying it's always going to be joyful and fantastic and without problems and you won't get annoyed sometimes, but it will feed something. It will feed a part of you. It will feed your heart. It will feed, I hate using heart as a metaphor, but you know what I mean? It will feed a part of you. If it stops feeding you, it will actually start starving you. Do not be in a space that starves you. Again, that doesn't mean that sometimes you're not annoyed or frustrated or go through a difficult season with that group. That's something you have to feel out for yourself. But if that group is starving you, that means it's not feeding you, and that's not where you're supposed to be. Go elsewhere. That's one of the ways I believe spirit communicates. Listen to your body. It will tell you. If you find yourself and you're in like some kind of group who's raising money or planning events or serving or I don't know, whatever it is, and it's taking more than it's giving from you, leave. You're not supposed to be there. You're going to start giving from a bad place, and that group will be worse off for it, right?
Well, and you say this all the time, and anyone who has been brought up in any type of religious community, I would hope would at least know a bit about this, is, taking time for rest and time for holy, time for a little bit of R&R. Rest is holy. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be working all the time. And, it's hard for me as a pastor because as a pastor, I am constantly trying to uplift people in a multitude of different ways. And sometimes it's difficult for me. I don't really get personal that much, but sometimes it's difficult for me because I struggle to rest. I struggle to see that rest is holy. And so, if you're getting burnt out doing all these things, then take a little hiatus. Take a little holy rest.
Or if you find yourself thinking, which, listen, we've all been there, but if you find yourself really thinking, well, if I leave this group, there'll be nothing without me.
Yeah, that's not
Check
true.
yourself. That's your ego talking.
Yeah.
Get out of here with that stuff. Nobody's that important. If the group's going to fall apart without you, let it.
It
is okay. You're a person.
I also would like to say this, too, that sometimes death is healthy.
Yeah, letting something
Let's
die.
Just pause with that.
Well, the Jesus story is there is nothing new can be grown until something dies first.
Right. I mean, if we are, the church for millennia has seen itself, the Christian church I don't care whether you're Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, all of the great traditions of Christianity have all used this. It's all throughout the traditions. We are Easter people. Well, you can't have Easter without some death. And I know that might sound morbid, but sometimes if something is kind of like flummoxing and you don't know where it's going, sometimes it is important to lay it to rest and bury it in order that it can see something new and have a springtime renewed resurrection. Mm-hmm. And so we say, we can't let this die. We can't let it die. Well, sure, it's all right to have hope like that. And sometimes things don't have to die right away. But sometimes if something is not working, it is better to let it cease and rest so that true restoration and resurrection can come.
That's good. I should have started here. There's a few more Bible verses that I'm quickly going to go over, but we're going to do an episode one of these times, is church political. Today we're doing business, but we're going to do political soon.
I thought we did something like that.
We didn't do political specifically. I think we've just mentioned it quite a few times, but we can really tackle the word politics. We're in verses right now of the Bible. Let's just span out, just really quickly, 2 minutes here. The overarching story of the Bible is that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt by the Pharaoh. Moses, who was part royalty, part enslaved Israelite, freed them. They were wandering in the desert. They needed a new way to arrange their lives, which is why Leviticus has a lot to say about resources. Leviticus is a political, economic text, right? It has a lot to say with how we spend our money, how we share resources, how we forgive each other, how we right our wrongs. That is political stuff. That is economic stuff. And then they arrived to the Canaanites, and we really have to say this too. What they did there was, today we'd call it genocide, right? But there's also no historical evidence that actually happened. But besides the point, they arrived to the Promised Land. That's a really difficult term these days, but biblically that's what it's called. They arrived to the Promised Land. They set up their new life. Not long after, there's this great king named David who comes along after the time of the judges, yada yada. David comes along, and David is a great king. He did some really bad things, but he brought peace and prosperity, relatively speaking. And then he died. And Solomon was terrible. Solomon built the temple. And you know what he did? He used slave labor. So they had this whole economic system built around not becoming slaves again. And then King Solomon made the Israelites slaves again to build his grand temple. And then Solomon's son came along and everything just fell apart. It was all a mess. So their entire economic system collapsed. And then the Romans eventually came in and conquered them, and the Romans were enslaving them. But in between all of these enslavement experiences, sufferings, they had the Jubilee, they had the Sabbath, right? They had economic systems so that people would not become enslaved anymore, so that people were taken care of. They had a very... they wouldn't have called this, but a lot of socialist kind of stuff going on. A lot of care for everybody. I don't even know if I want to use that term to overlay that's a later thing.
However,
but they had those values there. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, in the book of Acts, which if you're in a liturgical church, as we talk about a lot on this podcast, all throughout the Easter season, from Easter Sunday to Pentecost, you almost every year in those 50 days, you will get a lot of readings from the book of Acts, which is one of the early kind of historical texts of the early Jesus followers. And I forget exactly, I think it's Acts 2. Don't quote me on the chapter, but in Acts, it specifically speaks of selling your goods and sharing all things in common. Mm-hmm. This was I should say two of the tenets, the great tenets of the early Jesus followers who would eventually become Christians, that they sold all they had to give to the poor, and they shared all things in common, and they ate these meals together and followed the teachings of Jesus and practice in particular baptism and communion, the Eucharist. And it's interesting. There's this passage, I want to share this. We're sharing this Bible. It's interesting. Solomon, it gets a lot of, I'll use the word that is used here. He gets a lot of bad rap. And indeed, that is...
he was greedy.
How can I say it? That is merited. Solomon getting a bad rap is merited. He was not the best type of a person, not the best type of a monarch, a king. It's interesting in St. Luke's Gospel in the New Testament, one of the Gospels. Luke's Gospel shares this, and it's interesting. It says, "Consider how the wild flowers." Some other versions will say the lilies. But consider how the wild flowers or the lilies grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. This is interesting. So they do not labor or spin. Solomon was obsessed with building a new empire. He was obsessed with the labor of enslaved people. He was obsessed with spinning people, and always when we talk about spinning, it's talking about making things. You got to make more. You got to labor more. You have to be. He was using enslaved labor. We know that. And Luke's gospel is talking about Solomon in all his splendor. Not even he was dressed like something that God created from the beginning, just to take in and look. That's the wildflowers that are growing in the meadow, the lilies that are blossoming from new life.
And we are part of creation. The Tao Te Ching says this thing that I love, and I have it written in my notebook, and it's a mantra I say in my head whenever I start having a tight grip around something, which is, when, I'm going to paraphrase here, but when you do nothing, nothing is left undone. When you do nothing, nothing is left undone, which is to say in Christian language, relax. You're just like a lily. You're just like a wildflower. You're part of creation. And if you just stop your labor, that's the practice of Sabbath. Stop working and you'll realize life goes on without you. You are, and I say this in the most liberating way, you're not that important to this whole thing. You're a human being. You're not a human doing. Just stop. It's fine.
So let me share
Related to money.
Can I share this one thing too?
Yeah.
Related to what we're talking about, the many passages talking about wanting more and more and more and making more and more money and laboring more and more and more and growing your community and making profits for shareholders and all this type of capitalistic nonsense that many
keeps you chasing.
That many corporations are talking about. We're talking about these passages from 2 Corinthians with Paul and the passages from Proverbs from the Hebrew Scriptures, the passage from Luke about the wild flowers and the lilies, and not paying attention to laboring and spinning and the splendor of Solomon and what are these. Jesus is saying all of this splendor, all of this labor and all of this work and all of this stuff, and Solomon thinks that he's doing all these wonderful things and he's enslaving these people while doing them.
But
and
this flower is better than him.
But he can't even pay attention to the wild flowers and the meadows and the lilies and all these things that are all surrounding all creation, that are just growing around, coming up with very little control. Here's the interesting thing, although now I'm losing train of thought.
Money? Is it related to money and business?
Yeah, money and business.
If it comes back, just let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. So, really quickly, the Bible and money. So we gave you like a wide-eyed view, right? And now we're going to zoom back in. Proverbs 19 talks about giving to the poor. Luke chapter 6 verse 38 says, "Forgive and you will be forgiven. Give and it will be given to you." And people in 12-step recovery, they have this wisdom too, by the way. They say things like you can only keep what you give away. This is about money too. Hebrews 13:5 talks about being free from the love of money and being content with what you have. Proverbs chapter 3 verses 9 through 10 talks about honoring the Lord with your wealth, and then your barns and wine vats will be overflowing. Ecclesiastes, I can never say that word right, but chapter 5 verse 10 says, "Those who love money will never have enough and never be satisfied with their income." So just over and over, where it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It feels like nobody talks about the Bible and money, but the Bible is full of economic teachings. So I want to talk about just like some personal ethics of money. And I want to talk about something that I call numbers and movement, or fasting and feasting. Okay? So something that I care about even more than what the Bible says is my own lived experience, right? So there have been countless times in my life when something was supposed to be one amount, but then it was a lot more. Car inspections come to mind, right? Like our cars have to go past inspection. We think it's going to be, $100, and then suddenly it's $1,200, right? That is frustrating. It's frustrating, right? So this can be stressful. Recognize it, talk about it, process it, figure it out. Fine. That's fine, right? Sometimes, though, we all know people like this. Maybe you are a person like this. Sometimes people really hone in on those things, but then if they're like at a Starbucks drive-thru and somebody in front of them paid for their $8 drink, they kind of forget about that really quickly. Or how many times have we been at Boscov's to buy like a shirt or a pair of pants and we get up to the register and it's like $15 cheaper than we thought, right? And I tend to believe that these things kind of balance out, because sometimes things cost more than we think, but sometimes they don't.
Right.
Sometimes we catch a break. Both of those things happen. So if you're going to be grumpy about the times when things cost more, fine. But you better be equally as joyful when things cost less. Because where we give our attention is where we give our power. And I think that matters, right? So I know people, I'm going to talk about money ethics in a little bit and how I've come to have those money ethics and how it relates to church now. But I have known, there's no humble way to say this. I've served on a lot of board of directors. I've known a lot of rich people. I'm sure Dillon has too.
I do.
Yes. We have known a lot of rich people. When you serve on boards of directors, you get to know a lot of rich people. I'm going to say this to be... Go ahead.
I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. As a pastor, I have a lot of affluent, wealthy people that like to come to me and flaunt their money and like to control sometimes certain things that go on. And so I am not unaware of how money can distort the views of the
Church's
common
purpose,
community for the individual gains of an individual or a certain family.
Yeah.
And so you got to balance that.
Yes. So there's money and power, but I'm also still thinking about this, like, sometimes you have a lot of money, sometimes you don't, right? This, like, fasting and feasting, right? Sometimes there is money, sometimes there isn't.
I like the fasting and feasting
Yeah.
thing.
But, so I've worked with a lot of people who have a lot of money. I've been on boards of directors with them. I've been in groups with them. I've worked with them. And I'm going to say this 100%. I've gotten to know, oftentimes they are older men, but I've gotten to know them. I've heard their story 100% of the time. I have yet to meet a person who has a lot of money where this isn't true. For as much money as they have made, they have lost a lot of money along the way. So if you are like Dillon and I, and you're like able to pay your bills and you're privileged enough to do that, but also you have to like watch money as well because you're not rolling in dough, just know that sometimes you lose money, things cost more than you thought, things were unexpected, you lost money for whatever reason, and then sometimes you are given money because somebody in the Starbucks line buys your coffee in front of you, or because something was on sale and you didn't realize it, or somebody gave you a break, or you got a random check refund because you double paid a bill one time and 2 months later a check comes back to you, right? Whatever it is, just know that more money, more problems, like, yes, just take your issues, and more money just makes it bigger. People who have a lot of money, they have also lost a lot of money. I have yet to hear a rich person, and I've heard a lot of rich people talk about their story, who hasn't talked about how they've lost a lot of money. And those two things have to be held in tension, right? Money is a paradox. So we have to live in the paradox of sometimes there's a lot of money and sometimes there's a loss of money. Both of those things are true, and sometimes the amount of money we have is significant, and sometimes the loss is significant. And the language I like is fasting and feasting. There are seasons, right? Just like there's a season, if you're like me, I'm very seasonal. Some seasons, your appetite for food is much bigger, right? For me, when spring comes, I'm not as hungry, or you crave like fresh fruit in the springtime, right? Mm-hmm. I think that money is the same. There are seasons of less money. I don't know if it's an annual season. Sometimes it's just a season of life. But money is seasonal. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. So let's talk about money ethics. Dillon and I are not finance experts again. We are two people who study Christianity in different ways, and we live into Christianity. We are two regular people who are married, and we talk about money in our family, but also we both have professional experience discussing money, Dillon specifically in churches. So let's talk about money ethics just from that experience. I don't want to make it out to be like we are financial experts, because I have no advice to give when it comes to money. I have my own issues with money.
Nor do I.
So we all have a story about our lives. Again, I told you I'm going to get woo-woo here. I'm going to ask you a question.
Me?
Well, you and I have already asked this before. I'm going to ask everybody else. Just think about it. Think about your childhood and the family that you came from. Were you taught that life is a struggle to be endured? Dillon's laughing. Or an adventure to go on?
Samantha loves this question.
Oh, I love it. If you ask somebody this question, it doesn't take them more than 30 seconds to have an answer.
We're going to give your answer?
Oh, yeah. It's up to you if you give yours. I don't know. But were you taught from your family of origin that life is a struggle to be endured or an adventure to go on? This is related to money, by the way, so just hold on. This is a question Dillon and I talk about a lot. And everybody knows pretty quickly their answer, right? Or like something comes up for them. When you ask this question, something comes up for them. Like they've got a story to tell. They want to tell you about the personality of their mother. They want to tell you about their father's money habits, or they want to tell you just whatever it is, right? So I'll tell you mine. So, some context. Some people, the way Dillon and I talk about this, some people are raised in homes of what Dillon and I call homes of debt, duty, and obligation. Some people are modeled or taught that life is a struggle and you have duties and you just have to endure it and you have to be responsible and this is it, right? And this is not a bad thing to be taught, by the way. There's truth in that.
And there's also, and that's different than perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Both of these things have shadow sides, by the way. These are not like one is good and one is bad, right? Responsibility matters. Dillon and I, before we started dating, because Dillon was a good time in his 20s, and I told him, if we are going to date, you have to be the kind of person where if I say pick me up at the airport at 3:00, you are there at 2:30 waiting for me, right? Responsibility matters. I want to build a life with somebody where when they make an obligation, they stick to it, right? Debt, duty, and obligation, those are not bad things, right? But sometimes it can be a problem because you're taught that all of life is about duty and obligation, right? So I will say that I do not come from that kind of family. I don't come from a debt, duty, obligation kind of family. It doesn't mean I come from a family that didn't teach responsibility. That's not at all what I'm saying, but I don't have that kind of, like I come from a family, listen, we have issues, don't we all? But my parents enjoy life.
They do.
Yeah. I was not raised by people who didn't. There isn't much misery in the personality of my family. That doesn't mean there aren't hardships, because everybody has hardships, but there's not misery in my family. There's a sense of adventure. My parents do things for fun. They don't move through life as if it's all about duty and it's all a struggle and you just got to make it, right? It just isn't the guiding ethic of where I come from. My dad, I'll get specific. My dad has always had intense hobbies outside of work. And these hobbies were not to make money. He has had woodworking, fly fishing, and making his own fly fishing lure or whatever it's called. He's made his own bicycles from scratch. My mom, right? Like grocery shopping and cooking sounds like just like a family chore or obligation. But I remember my mom, she would go, her best friend, who has passed away, but her name's Donna, they would go grocery shopping together and like hang out and talk while they're pushing their carts. Like she would make a social event out of just grocery shopping. Instead of cooking, cooking throughout the week, she would go spend all day Saturday with her friends and they would just cook, like a million meals together, and then they'd bring them home to their separate homes and freeze them. She turned these regular things into fun things. She goes out to eat with her friends all the time, right? I say all of that because I don't come from that kind of family of debt, duty, and obligation. I very much come from a family where every day was just kind of like, hey, enjoy your life. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Mm-hmm.
So I say this because I really internalized along the way that we can do things just because we want to, right? I was taught, it was modeled for me, you can do things, like you don't have to wake up and go to work and come home and be like, oh, just the grind, you know? My parents worked, right? Sometimes demanding work. And yet it wasn't this, I think I've made my point. So, I wasn't taught that everything that brings you joy has to make money, right? I wasn't taught to hate your job, even if it's hard sometimes. Not everything is a chore or an obligation. And actually, some of our hobbies will even cost us money. And I am a person of both fleeting hobbies, like I'll just randomly crochet for a month and then I won't do that for 3 years. I'm also a person of very intense hobbies where I'll spend years working on something like a book or something and I'll be just downright obsessed with it. I have constant projects in the work just for the joy of it. This was modeled for me. And one recent project is writing a book that a publisher is interested in and is paying me for, which is crazy. And I don't say this to appear humble, but I 100% don't even care about that money. I would have written that book even if nobody would have paid me for it. I 100% mean that. And when I signed the official contract, I told somebody close to me about it. And the first thing they said was, how much money are you going to make from it? Oh, and it was like a punch in the gut. It felt cheap. It felt icky. Like this thing that brought me so much deep joy, they wanted to know how much money it would make me, almost as if like attaching money to it cheapened it, right? It crushed me. I talked to Dillon about it. And then a few days later, Dillon was offered this exciting opportunity doing something in the community. And he came home. He was pretty excited. He told me about it. And do you remember this?
Oh, I do.
What the first thing out of my mouth was? Without even thinking, I asked him, oh, how much does it pay? Before I even said congratulations or asked him questions about it or recognized his excitement, I asked him how much would he get paid for it. And I didn't even realize it until later that night when Dillon pointed it out to me. So I had always thought that I had this liberated posture towards money, but it turns out not as much as I thought. So I had to go inward with that and reflect on what my actual relationship to money was or is, right? That was a difficult thing for me, right? So when we talk about money, I tell you this story because when we talk about money, we are actually revealing our worldviews. We are revealing things like hoarding, scarcity, abundance, growth, avoidance, gluttony, right? When we talk about, just listen to people. Listen to how they talk about money and you will find out a lot about them. The undertones are subtle, but they are real. So even things like when somebody says, like, if you go on vacation, right? And somebody says, oh, must be nice. Or if somebody buys a new fancy car, oh, must be nice. Or maybe somebody like paid off a debt, must be nice, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, absolutely.
This communicates resentment. People who cannot be happy about another person's goodness, they are revealing their inability to be at peace with the goodness that comes their way.
That's very good.
People, listen, unfair things come our way. Bad things happen to everybody, yes, but good things happen to everybody too. And that's my whole point here is, can we see both with eyes wide open? When we see goodness flowing, I'm going to use that word flowing and movement. When goodness moves towards others in the form of money, can we experience it fully? Can we be happy for them? Because if we can't be happy for another person's financial goodness, right, the movement of goodness towards them, then we can't be happy when it comes. We might not even recognize it when it comes to us. When somebody pays for our $8 drink at Starbucks, we might just be like, oh, that's nice, and then move along with our day. And yet, if a pair of jeans that we buy is $8 more expensive, it might ruin our week. That's a problem. I really care about this.
I think it's good.
So when we resent the goodness that comes to others, we are cutting ourselves off from the goodness that comes to us too. And when we talk about money and hear others talk about money, we can witness people's worldviews and beliefs about this reality. These things are true no matter how much money you have. So one year, so now we're talking about money, ethics, and then we're really going to make the point. Like all this is building to church is not a business. So one year I volunteered to do taxes for low-income people in my county. And there was this couple, probably in their like late 50s, early 60s, I can't remember, and I did their taxes. They both had full-time jobs, and they were so kind, and they were sitting there, and they were holding hands, and they had been married, I think, for like 3 or 4 decades, right? For many decades. And I needed their home address at the end. And that's when they told me they didn't have a home address right now. And after talking to them a little more, I learned that they had a medical issue a few years before this, and they had medical debt, and they lost their house, and they had been sleeping in their car for a few months. They did not sound resentful or angry. They also didn't sound like just obliviously positive either. They talked about how they knew it would get better soon, and it's just something they had to do for now. So I do want to say that this is a system issue, a society that would be set up in a way where a medical diagnosis would lead to 2 people who have 2 full-time jobs losing their house. That's a society. Remember how I said energies will collapse in on themselves? Energies will turn inward. Yeah, that's a society who will collapse. That's a society who cannot survive, and we're seeing it right now. Also, that couple who was sleeping in their car, they had a trust and an outlook that was so obvious when they talked about money and debt. It wasn't blind positivity. It was a bold acceptance of this terrible reality that they found themselves in. But they also had an understanding of this, like what I now call the movement of money or the flow of money. They understood that this isn't permanent. I know I just keep talking about boards, but that's where a lot of my experience with money is. I used to be a volunteer GED teacher and on the board of directors for a literacy council where I used to live. And when I tell you that this organization was the best organization I've ever been a part of, I can't even begin to tell you how true that is. It's such a beautiful place with beautifully kind people. And I started as a GED volunteer teacher. And that really felt like the front lines. I worked with adults and they had such interesting stories. And some of them had a lot of heartbreak in their stories. And they just needed to remember how to do math so they could pass their GED. So I spent hours a week with them teaching them math. They would pass their GED. I got to know them. It was great. And then after a few months, I was asked to become a board member. So I was. And it was so strange because I was on the front lines for so long as a GED teacher, and now I was also on the board of directors, and it felt like boots on the ground in a way. And then I was like behind the scenes on the board. And it was just weird because on the board, you talk about money. And I'm saying that because there's the sexy thing of helping somebody. And then there's the very not sexy thing of being behind the scenes, talking about money, right? So I was also on the board for an addiction treatment center. And once a year, the men who were helped by this center, they would come and tell their stories at our meeting. People would be crying. It was so meaningful. And then we wouldn't see them for another year. And we would spend the whole year talking about money so we could keep helping men in recovery, right? So again, there's like the thing that's being done. I think about a church. There's the collecting coats so people can have coats in the winter who can't afford one. There's like serving people in the community a spaghetti dinner. But then there's the behind the scenes of talking about money so you can figure out how to do this. And really, that's all I talked about. You were on boards? Have you ever been on boards? Yeah, and councils and things like that?
Yeah.
Money.
I also did GED tutoring.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, when I had just graduated college, there was I was living in Harrisburg, and there was a Presbyterian church in downtown Harrisburg that was looking for people to help tutor and facilitate reading and social studies courses for people seeking their GED. And I signed up to do it, and I did that for almost close to 2.5, 3 years.
So you had like boots on the ground, but guarantee you there were people behind the scenes who were figuring out how to raise money.
Yes, because I had for a short time served. So the way that the way that this program worked was it was the GED program at the Pine Street Presbyterian Church
in Harrisburg.
In Harrisburg, and people that were facilitators or tutors would.
What's funny is your boss's name was Kathleen and my boss's name was Kathleen.
Oh, that's fascinating.
2 different places.
Oh, yeah, 2 different places. Yeah, and we would rotate off, but we would have to go and tell stories about about the individuals who we were tutoring and helping, and their kind of journey in life to the Presbyterian Church's session, which is a type of governance of the Presbyterian Church, so that they could see how people were progressing, but also continue their outreach funding to the program, and so. We both share that in common. Yeah. But it was interesting because you're both helping those people, and then you're also sitting before a type of governance board. I wasn't on the board, but I was going to advocate for them.
The reason I bring up boards of directors is because if you serve on those groups, again, churches, if you serve on church groups, it's the same way. Some people are obsessed. There's 2 things happening at once. There's the numbers and there's the movement, or the facts and the flow. Or another way to say it is the statistics and spirit, right? I like numbers and movement. Mm-hmm. Maybe like figures and flow is another one too, right? Mm-hmm. So there's the numbers. And on a board or a council or a group or whatever, some people are obsessed with the rigid numbers, right? But they have no spiritual or ethic of money besides just the hard and fast numbers. And if you work with those people, they're very difficult to work with. Maybe a group even needs someone like that, perhaps, I'm not sure. But just the rigidity of like, this is the number and this is all it is very like, okay, but money is a little more stretchy. It's not just hard and fast numbers, right? The numbers matter, they matter, but it's not the hard and fast numbers.
Well, it is interesting. Yeah, it is. In fact, that's very interesting that you bring that up. It's not about the hard and fast numbers. And I don't know if you saw this, because was there a religious connection to the GED that you did, or no?
No, the GED, no, but the recovery place that I did, there
Oh,
was
the Methodist,
they were connected to church.
So it was interesting because where I was tutoring and facilitating GED classes, with obviously a group with others, was very interesting because this was a program run by a Christian church, a Presbyterian church, but they linked up with the Tri-County OIC, which was they did literacy and job training and all kinds of other things. A non-religious organization who was very concerned about the success of numbers, and numbers were connected to funding, and so it was interesting because you would hear the director of the literacy council at the church for the GEDs. She would be talking about people's personal growth and about them really, them being able to feed their families and get a job.
Because sometimes profit is not measurable in dollars.
And the church board, the church board, the session, the Presbyterian session, was interested in seeing these people's lives transformed, and then being able to feed their families and finally be able to get into housing and stuff. And the other side was not necessarily wrong, but just, once again, very different. What is the purpose? The difference between a kind of business model and a religious organization or church model is the purpose is very different. The church was looking at how is this person and their family being uplifted, and how are they being able to have clothes and housing and food and healthcare and all these types of things. And then on the other side it was, well, can they pass the test? And if they can pass the test, then we'll give you more funding. So it's kind of a little more cutthroat.
Yeah, when I worked at the Literacy Council, it was the same way. The people there, and the reason I loved volunteering with them and being on their board and just spending time there and getting to know the people there, is because they all had an ethic of money and getting a cough. It was just beautiful. They weren't all about the numbers. Hold on. So, I think my allergies are acting up. So, money is about two things always: numbers and movement. We can become too obsessed with numbers. Money is...
Flowers?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm just coughing all of a sudden. Okay. Money... I've been talking about this numbers and movement the whole time, so now we're actually going to talk about it. Money is an energy. Yes, it's about the rigid numbers. Yes, we have to be people of numbers. You can't just go spending money you don't have. And again, it's a paradox. Money is an energy. When you give money or raise money with resentment attached, that will be the downfall of that group. Money enters and it exits. I am struggling. Hold on. I did have cough drops, but I think the girls took them somewhere.
I'll go get one.
No, it's all right. It's all right. Okay, so money is an energy. It enters and it exits. It comes and it goes. I think of it like waves, like high tide and low tide, right? Feast and fast, right? Money moves. One time when we were at St. Paul's Church in Enola, Pennsylvania, which is another great organization, these two people stood up and they gave a, what do you call it? Like a temple chat?
A temple talk or stewardship talk.
Stewardship talk, thank you. And they talked about money, and they brought actual coins and dollars up with them, and they showed what happened. So one person, let's see if I can describe this. One person dropped money into the hands of somebody, and as soon as the money touched their hands, they squeezed.
Clenched it.
They like made a fist and like with all the money in their fists. And you could see that money didn't fall to the floor, like to the bottom. And then they did the same thing, but the people had open hands and their fingers were like spread apart. So like really open hands. And when they did that, the money like fell through their hands, and they had some money in their hands, but the other money like fell through. And I don't know why that image has stayed with me, but it has. Because there is something about living with closed fists, like just like clenched fists, right? Versus having open palms with spread fingers and like living with open hands, right? There's a difference. So too much rigidity about the numbers does not allow for movement. Equally, too much magical thinking about movement is irresponsible. That's not what we're arguing. That's not what we're saying. But it is a dance. It's about numbers, but it's also about movement. It's about trust, right? So money is equally about discipline and trust, right? So it's about this giving. You can only keep what you give away. Again, we went through all those biblical passages. So this is a very Christian and Jewish teaching. So let's connect these concepts of money to church. Money heightens the dynamic that already exists in a person, couple, family, or organization. If you are miserable, more money will make you more miserable. Look at how a person or a community handles money, and you will learn a lot about that group's personality. I've always volunteered at nonprofits, literacy councils, libraries, churches, addiction places, right? And a personal ethic of mine is I cannot work with an organization or group who has a tight grip on their money. In my experience, groups rarely have the problem of being too irresponsible with money. The issue is that they are all numbers and no movement, no trust, just all numbers, right? They hold on to their money. They want that number to get bigger. And changing the culture of a place is not a gift of mine, so I leave. I've left not a lot, but a couple of groups because I realized after a year or two that like, oh, this is just not changing. It's difficult for me to be around groups who are like that in these nonprofit and church settings. So businesses can have their own ethics, right? We talked about the Bible. We talked about money ethics and how it comes out of the Bible. Businesses can have their own ethics. They can be profit-based if they want, I guess, but churches are called to be something else. Churches are Christian houses. We are not businesses. We need to care about money and be responsible, but we're not supposed to arrange ourselves financially around profit. We arrange ourselves financially around movement, the movement of the money. So what Dillon and I always talk about in our own family, but also in the context of the church, is money should constantly, again, I think of the ocean like waves coming in and out. Money should always be coming in and then going out and then coming in and then going out. And built into that movement, there has to be a trust that when you let go of money, more will come in. It doesn't mean you sit around doing nothing. You fundraise, you do what you have to do, you figure it out, but there has to be a trust. You can't close your fist around the money and expect that everything will be okay. That's how places die. That's how things crumble in on themselves. So, by the way, this movement is called spirit. We believe movement is spirit animated, right? Money moves. It goes in, it comes in, it goes out. And this is not separate from God and trust and faith. We trust that when we use money to feed the hungry or give canned goods away or whatever, that this money will come back. It moves in and out. It comes and goes. Have I made my point pretty clear?
Yeah, it's for Lutherans, which Samantha and I are, when someone would ask the definition of what is the church, as a Lutheran pastor, our church takes a clear stance on that, which is found in our church confessions, they're called, which are our church teachings or church doctrines, which come from something called the Augsburg Confession from Germany. And so if someone were to say, what is the church? So what's the difference between a church and a business? An easy answer with some flexibility and interpretation. The Augsburg Confession of the Lutheran Church states that the church, or a church, is a community of people, a community of believers who trust, and where the word of God is read and preached, and also the sacraments are administered. So that means where baptisms and communion are being celebrated, where the stories from the Old Testament and the New Testament are being shared and preached, and where there is a gathered community coming together. That's the church. A more modern interpretation of that is that the church is made up of three things. The church is made up of education, so educating people on the stories and the tradition and the morals and the ethics. So a church promotes education. The third thing is that the church promotes worship, the worship of God, which would include things also like baptism and communion and weddings and funerals and confirmation, different types of things like that. And then the third thing would be service to the community, service to the marginalized, those who need clothes, those who are hungry, those who are unhoused, those who are struggling with addiction and dependence, widows and orphans, people who are sick, people who are homebound. So out of the Augsburg Confession, where people gather and they hear the teachings and they administer the sacraments, we keep to that, but we also add the teachings of Jesus. So it's the three things: education, worship, service to the community. That's what makes a church.
Yes. And a church does need money
to do those things.
And that is fine. Talk about money, but it does not have the same structure, system, posture, ethics of a business.
Right, because when I offer a class or a lecture or a worship service, I'm not charging people to come
services,
in. Yeah. Now, if we have like a dinner or something and it's going to a specific cause or a specific project or something like that, okay, there's a charge. But when I am offering something on behalf of the church that has to do with worship, that has to do with education, that has to do with helping those who are in need, those things are free of charge.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Can
you talk about tax exempt quickly? So churches are tax exempt.
Yes.
They're not 501c3. What are they?
They're 501c3,
Are they?
but they're 501c3, but they follow under, so there's 501c3 charitable organizations.
Right.
And then there's a subset of that 501c3, and there's differences of a house of worship. Mm-hmm. So 501c3 charitable organizations, that would be something like the Lions Club and the Rotary Club and other types of things. Literacy Council, a community arts center, something like that. 501c3 charitable organizations, nonprofit organizations, and then 501c3. This is under the U.S.
Libraries are nonprofit.
Yeah, nonprofit. This falls under the U.S. tax code, according to what the IRS, so the Internal Revenue Service. So churches are 501c3 houses of worship, right? Mm-hmm. Which is very different because the tax exempt status of a 501c3 house of worship is meaning that we are not allowed to make a profit that is going to go back to the organization unless it is going right back out the door through some type of community service, through some type of free education, through some type of offering of worship services or weddings or funerals.
Which, by the way, is a credential for any nonprofit. That's why they're tax exempt.
Right. Because they are offering
a service.
They are offering the service. They're not making a profit. They are offering free services to people in the community, whether they're a member or they're not a member of the church. A business under the U.S. tax code is subject to taxes and the income that comes from those taxes, the property that is held, and the sales from profits that are sold through the buying and selling of goods.
Yeah. Now this gets really complicated, and maybe it doesn't even have a place here, but like our church, St. John's, we don't own that land even. The denomination does.
Well, we hold the charter to that land. We hold the charter and the deed to that land.
But we can't sell it and make money off of it if we wanted to.
We
more
could, but we would have to ask special permission through
Okay.
through the synodical governance of the church.
Is this stuff you learn in seminary, or do you have to learn it along the way?
Yeah, no, you have to learn it in seminary, but also
What's the class called? Like church
I think it's
economics?
church polity and administration. Yeah.
That's hot.
It's I actually find it church polity. The word polity is not politics. Polity means governance, and
They're related.
and then, and administration means the administration of a church.
Mm-hmm.
So the interesting thing is that every congregation in the Lutheran Church holds the deed and the charter of the church on behalf of the synod, which is to which it belongs.
Okay.
And then if they were wanting to sell it, they have permission to sell it as a congregation, but that money goes back to the synod because the synod takes ownership of that.
Right.
So it is a little bit more complicated than just
Right.
like, well, this is that. But
The point is, a church can't or shouldn't be hoarding money. If your pastor has a private jet, you might want to look at that.
I don't know if somebody could maybe dig something up, but I'll go out on a limb to say that there is no ELCA pastor, including the presiding bishop, who
has a private jet.
who is the lead bishop of our denomination.
No, mega church, evangelical churches.
She does not. She does not have a private jet
Yes. So
or a private pilot.
So Rob Bell, who is my favorite author, and he used to be a pastor, he, I guess he's still technically a pastor, but he doesn't really do that work anymore. I don't know. But he, whenever he was a new pastor, he went to a conference, and he was a mega church pastor back in the beginning, and there were pastors there who flew in on their private jets, and he was just astounded because he couldn't even afford a truck that he wanted. Like, he was broke, him and his wife. And he, realized, because people were doing this at the conference, there were pastors buying from this stand. They were buying sermons, not even, so these pastors who were making enough money to have their own jets were buying sermons to give to their people, not even writing their own sermons. So again, just this ethic of a church not being a business, it's not universal. There are some churches that operate like a business to make profit. It's not biblical. It's not that I hate saying biblical because that's not an ethic of mine, but it's not biblical. It's not Christian. It is not Judeo-Christian values like those kinds of churches tend to flaunt. It is not. It's just crazy to me. Absolutely crazy. So we can't use, if you've used that language, we're not like, how dare you?
Well, and there are some people who buy their sermons.
Yes, I know.
Not just mega church pastors.
Really? Mm-hmm. Do you know any of them?
I do.
That's crazy.
I don't know.
Would you ever buy a sermon?
Never.
That's crazy to me.
Never.
That'd be like me buying a lesson plan. Mm-mm. I'm getting paid to do this work, and that's crazy.
No, because I was taught in seminary that and this is very difficult. I don't want to get into this too much. This could be its own episode type of a thing. But in terms of preaching, you are to preach to the needs of the community to which you serve.
Yeah.
You are to read the scriptures that are assigned for the week. That's how liturgical churches work. You have assigned readings. I don't pick the readings. They're assigned for me. And whatever is going on throughout the week in that community and throughout the world generally, you can throw in some current events if you'd like to do that. But I am speaking to the people of St. John's Church, to which I have been called to be their minister.
That's why I'm against online sermons.
Yeah, I am not preaching to the random person who is sitting on their recliner in Phoenix, Arizona.
Right.
I'm speaking to the people of St. John's Church in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who have come from a long line of coal cracker people.
Yeah. We have to be careful when we say that church is a business, because there are some churches that operate that way, on a profit kind of way. I feel like the summary of her entire hour and a half episode is, when you are dealing with money, especially in a Christian setting, keep your hands open. Don't keep a tight fist around the money. Do not bring an energy of resentment towards the giving or the using of money. And stay curious.
Yeah, stay curious.
To understand the mystery, first take a look at the history. The words we